Hello everyone, today is 30th of December. My name is Sahil and welcome to the newspaper analysis. Guys, first of all, let's have a look on today's GS folder. So today we will be taking a quote from the James E. Faust, who was an American political leader. He says, "Honesty is more than not lying. It is truth telling, truth speaking, truth living, and truth loving." Here, James Faust tries to say that honesty is not a passive activity where you just refuse to participate into the corruption. Rather, honesty is an active activity where you take the initiative, take the leads in order to bring the culture of transparency and in order to preserve the spirit of truth. Guys, this particular quote can be utilized into the GS paper number 4 into the foundational value of the civil services, and many a times into the GS paper number 4 the question has been given where some of the keywords are given, and it has been asked that what these keywords mean to you. So guys, in such a line, if a question comes, we can give the quote of the James E. Faust in context of honesty. So guys, that's it, and now let's take the newspaper analysis in detail. Now guys, taking up the first article, so it has been taken from the Indian Express and it is important for GS paper number 3 under the heading of infrastructure. Now guys, recently the dedicated freight corridors section has been inaugurated by the Prime Minister, and into this particular context, let's see what this dedicated freight corridor is and what will be the importance of the dedicated freight corridor for the India. Now guys, when we talk about the dedicated freight corridor, it is the largest infrastructure project that has ever been taken into the independent India. It is a nearly 3000 kilometers corridor track which will be going in two parts. One will be the eastern dedicated freight corridor and other will be the western dedicated freight corridor. You can see here onto the picture. Now guys, first of all, if we discuss about the western dedicated freight corridor, it will be starting from the Dadri, which is in Uttar Pradesh, and will be culminating into the Maharashtra in Mumbai JNPT, that is the Jawaharlal Nehru Port Trust. Then, guys, the other wing, it is the Eastern Dedicated Freight Corridor. It is starting from the Ludhiana and will be culminating into the Dankuni in the West Bengal. Now, in total, this is the 3000 kilometers project. Now, guys, recently what has happened, the Prime Minister has inaugurated one of the section into the Eastern Dedicated Freight Corridor, that is between the Khurja to Bhaupur. Now, Bhaupur is around Kanpur, so you can also call it as that Khurja to Kanpur. So, this particular section has been made operational. Now, guys, at the same time, the work is going on the other segments of the dedicated freight corridor onto both the western as well as eastern arms, and it is expected that in next 3 to 4 years that dedicated freight corridor will be ready. Now, guys, the Eastern Dedicated Freight Corridor is being financed by the World Bank, and the Western Dedicated Freight Corridor is being financed by the Japan International Cooperation Agency. Now, guys, what is the importance or what are the benefits of these dedicated freight corridors? Number one, right now, if we see the track usage in India has been more than 100% onto the majority of tracks, and in some of the tracks, it goes to 150% and even to 200%. Now, such high usage leads to wear and tear, due to which the safety of the railways always is a questionable task, and many a times the derailment of the passenger trains, the cargo trains, the major cause is the defunct tracks. So basically, by having a kind of a entirely new arm of the railways will help to reduce the burden onto the existing infrastructure. Then guys, it will also ensure the speedy movement of the cargo. See, we want to make India a manufacturing destination, and into this particular direction the Make in India as well as Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan has been started. But always India's manufacturing has lagged behind because the internal movement of cargo has been slow, it has been very much costly. Now the slowness comes because the railway has always been slow. Here guys, you can see that the average movement of the freight cargo in India is 25 kilometer, which is way less than the internationally acceptable speeds. Then guys, it is also the expensive because when the railways are so much of slow, we need to rely on to the road transportation, and because of the high cost of the fuel, the road cargo is always expensive. So slowness and expensiveness both are there into the India's cargo movement. And now when the dedicated freight corridor will be operational, the trains here will be moving at the speed of minimum 50 to 60 kilometers, and immediately 2x speed will be achieved, and it will be solving the large problems of internal movement of cargo in India. Then guys, say thirdly, there is the problem of decongestion onto the present railway infrastructure, because onto the same track the cargo as well as passenger train has to operate. Now guys, if we just take an example of the Kanpur to Delhi route, every day 50 passenger trains and 60 cargo trains passes via Kanpur Delhi railway track, and you can assume that what will be the level of traffic. So therefore the dedicated freight corridor will be reducing this decongestion over the railways. After that guys, this dedicated freight corridor will also be helping to ease off the burden onto the national highways. See, national highways today account to just 2.7% of the roads in India, but at the same time traffic to the tune of 40 to 50% travels onto the national highway. So therefore our highways are over congested, they are overburdened. And guys, the reason is because of the movement via the trucks. And there again, the dedicated freight corridor, when it will be speedy, when it will be cheap, such a traffic will reduced here. Guys, in India every year there are 1,48,000 deaths which are there due to the road accidents, and majority of these deaths happen onto the national highways, because the highways have become unsafe due to excessive movement. So onto this particular front, in reducing the human fatalities also, the dedicated freight corridor can play an important role. And guys, finally the dedicated freight corridor will be helping, because right now our Indian economy is entered into the technical recession, and into the technical recession always it has been said that government need to increase the capital expenditure, because by it the human resource will be getting the labor, there will be the consumption of the steel, concrete, all such kind of things, and there will be the cyclic effects, and ultimately the economy can come out of a recession. So here also the investment into the DFC will be helping out. So guys, all these are the benefits of this DFC. Please keep all these dimensions into your mind for your GS paper number 3. So guys, that's it, and now we'll be moving to the next article. Now, guys, this particular article has also been taken from the Indian Express, and this article pertains to the recent National Defense Authorization Act, which has been there into the news from past few days. Now, we will be seeing that what this entire act is all about, and what is the controversy which is happening into the USA. So, guys, first of all, to give you the background, recently the Donald Trump, the president of USA, he had given the veto over this National Defense Authorization Act, which was a $740 billion legislation. Now, this National Defense Authorization Act was instrumental for the Department of Defense and its policies. Now, this particular act is instrumental in giving the permission to draw the money for paying the salaries of the army personnel, for making expenditure for their health care, for maintaining the bases of the American military overseas, and all such kind of things. And it has been said that such a kind of a legislation is very much important into the purview of the national security of America. But the Trump refused to give the approval, and he vetoed this particular thing. And for the first time, Congress had overpowered the veto given by the Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump had refused his approval because of two major clauses. Number one, Donald Trump wanted that the section number 230 of the Communication Decency Act of America needs to be amended. Now, guys, if you are following regularly, we have discussed this provision earlier also when we discussed an article from the Mint newspaper about the safe harbor policies. So, what are the safe harbor policies? These are the immunities which has been given to some of the social media platforms, that whatever is being published onto their platform, these media, they don't need to take the authority, because at the end of the day the people are the one who are posting it. So the safe harbor policies gives an immunity to the social media giants. Now Donald Trump calls this section 230 as a kind of an open invitation to China and Russia, that they can come and they can spread the dissatisfaction into the America. Donald Trump says that they have always used the social media in order to spread their propaganda. So therefore, he wanted the amendment into section number 230, but it has not been carried into the National Defense Authorization Act. So he refused the veto. Then the second reason is that you might be knowing that the few days back into the USA, Black Lives Matter campaign was going on. Now, guys, into the Black Lives Matter, it was said that the black people, they are needed to be given their due, and all the injustices that have been faced by the black people even historically, they are to be accounted. Now see, if we go little bit into the history of USA, you might be knowing that at one point of time, that is between 1861 to 1865, the USA had underwent a civil war where the southern states and northern states were at the conflict with each other. The southern states wanted to retain the slavery because, guys, the southern states were very much dependent on to the agriculture, and therefore the slaves were an instrumental part of their economy. However, the northern states, they wanted to abolish the slavery. So guys, for a brief period, for 3 4 to 5 years, the southern states, they made a kind of a confederation. Now the confederation, it was a breakaway section of the America. However, the north, it remained to be called as the union. So basically, the confederation was led by the confederate leaders, and these confederate leaders were actually the symbolic of the ones who wanted to keep the slavery alive. Now guys, there are many of the US bases in around the world which have been named around the confederate leaders, and the Donald Trump wanted that the name of these bases needs to be changed and on to some other uncontroversial leaders they can be named, but that thing was also not taken. So because of these two reasons, the Donald Trump gave the veto to the National Defense Authorization Act, and now it has been overpowered by the Congress by passing again the bill via a higher majority. So guys, this is the entire thing. Now here you we can also make a comparison between the Indian president and the US president. So guys, if Indian president gives a veto, then the bill can again be presented by passing with the same majority, and then the president has to mandatorily give the approval. However, if the US president refuses the bill, then guys, it cannot be passed by the same majority, but rather by the higher majority the bill has to be passed, and the same thing has happened into the US Congress. So guys, that's all about this particular article, and now we'll be moving to the next article. Now guys, this particular article has been taken from the Hindu newspaper, and it is analyzing the electoral bond scheme, and it is important for our GS paper number 2 under the topic of the electoral reforms. Now, in the nutshell, this particular article has criticized the electoral bond scheme and had said that this particular scheme has brought even more opaqueness, and the transparency has removed from the electoral process of India. Now, before going into the contentions of this particular article, let's see some the basic information. So guys, into the Indian democracy, elections plays an important role. Under article number 324, the Election Commission of India ensures the free and fair elections. Under article number 326, every person has been given the right to vote if he had passed the 18 years of age. Universal adult suffrage has been provided. Now guys, when we are talking about Indian elections, we don't follow the state funding of the elections, and therefore the political parties, they had to spend their own money, and for that particular money, the political parties often are dependent on to the donations via the common people, corporate organizations, and so on. Now guys, earlier the donations were being given into the cash as well as indirectly into the check to the political party, but it was said that such a thing has become problematic because many a time certain corporates, they want to donate, but they don't want to reveal their identity just in order to avoid the backlash from the opposite political parties. So therefore there was no element of anonymity into the electoral funding, and keeping this particular thing into the mind, the electoral bond scheme was announced by the government. Now, under this particular scheme, any government can buy an electoral bond from the designated banks. Right now, the State Bank of India is a designated bank. Now, in order to buy these electoral bonds, the money has to be given via the check or via the electronic transfer. So, basically, you can give the money to the bank, they will issue an electoral bond. This electoral bond will not be carrying your name. And, guys, then this particular electoral bond can be transferred to the political party, and the political party can can deposit that electoral bond again to the bank, and in return the money will be credited into the account of the political party. After that, within these electoral bonds, there is also a provision that within the 15 days of purchase, they have to be given to a political party. So this provision has been made so that a parallel economy into the way of a electoral bond is not made, because many a times people, if they want to hold money, they can just transfer them into the electoral bond and can keep it for indefinite time if this 15-day provision would not have been made. Now guys, since the very start, the electoral bond has come under the criticisms. They are because of the facts: number one, into the bond there is no name of the donor, so simply we cannot know whether the money is coming from the legitimate source or the illegitimate source. Moreover guys, it has reduced the transparency into the electoral process. Moreover, only the SBI bank is knowing that who is buying the bond, and you know that the SBI is a public bank, and all the information SBI had to give to the RBI, and RBI ultimately the gave information to the finance ministry, and via the finance ministry ultimately the ruling party can always know that what were the credentials, but such an information will never be known to the other parties. So here the ruling party has a kind of an inherent advantage vis-a-vis the other political party. So actually the anonymity has not came, but still the transparency has been reduced. After guys, it has been seen that the biggest beneficiary of the electoral bond scheme is the ruling party, and this particular thing can be seen by this particular fact that the BJP had received 210 crore via the electoral bond, whereas the next party, the Indian National Congress, had just received the 5 crore rupees. So basically electoral bond scheme has been controversial. Now guys, what this article is providing, see, recently an appeal was made to the CIC, that is the Central Information Commissioner, with respect to the RTI that was made into the State Bank of India, and under this particular RTI it was asked that the State Bank should give the information as how many people had applied for the electoral bond and what are their information. So such kind of information was asked, but the CIC refused to give the information, citing the anonymity clauses under the electoral bond. Now guys, it has been said that again the opaqueness in and the arbitrariness into which the information is not being given is highlighted by this particular ruling by the CIC. It was said that in 2003, the PUCL versus Union of India case, Supreme Court said that the freedom of speech and expression is a fundamental, and under that freedom of speech and expression, there is a very clear implication that the voter also has the freedom to know the information about the candidate for whom he is voting. And when the information here guys is not being provided with respect to the source of money of the candidate who is fighting the election, then simply the voters right to speech and in expression is being violated. Moreover guys, if we see that how the State Bank of India refused the information, so they have utilized the section number 8 of the RTA. Now the section number 8 provides that the information can be refused if number 1 it is held into the fiduciary capacity, and number 2 if it will not serve the public purpose. Now the State Bank India says that they have held the information in the fiduciary capacity, that is into the trust, and they cannot give the information. But guys, if we see, make a kind of a comprehensive reading of the section number 8, it has also been provided under section number 8 that anyhow the information is to be given if information will serve the greater public purpose. And even into the Yashwant Sinha case versus CBI, the Supreme Court also said that if information will be serving the greater purpose, then even the exempted information can be provided, and such kind of thing are not being appreciated. Moreover guys, earlier the CIC itself said that the political parties are the public authorities, and if the political parties are public authorities, so they have to mandatorily provide the information to the public, and into this particular capacity all such kind of information which is being concealed into the name of anonymity goes against the spirit of the transparency, and therefore all such kind of things are bad. Now guys, when we are writing about the GS paper number 2 issues with respect to the transparency, as well as in GS paper number 4 ethics, the transparency has been mentioned, so there we can use this particular reference. So guys, that's all about this particular article, and now we'll be moving to the next article. Now, guys, this particular article has been taken from the Hindu newspaper and it is important with respect to the GS paper number 3 as well as GS paper number 2 under the topic of geoeconomics and the geopolitics. Now, guys, this article is talking about the importance of the supply chain and what changes are coming into the supply chain scenario into the post pandemic world. First of all, guys, here it has been said that the supply chain resilience is the most important thing for any country's economic well being. Now, what do we mean by supply chain? It is simply the mechanism. It includes all the forward and backward linkages. For example, guys, this is a factory where the product is being made. Now, this factory is dependent on some of the raw material, and after the finished goods will be made here, it will be supplied to the ultimate market. So, basically, this entire structure is the supply chain, and any problem here at any point will be having an impact and the supply will get reduced. Now, guys, this supply chain can be impacted via the natural causes or via the man-made causes. Now, natural causes could be any kind of natural disaster. For example, into the Japan there was the tsunami which came, and after that for considerable period of time the Japanese supply chain was disrupted and Japan was not able to export the automobiles to the United States. Then, guys, similarly, when we talk about the man-made supply chain impacts, they could be sanctions by any one specific country or some country stopping the critical exports to another country, and those exports might be important for their final product. And here we can just take that example that, guys, few years back there was a crisis which happened between the China and the Japan. Japan held a Chinese trawler because of the dispute that was going between the China and Japan onto the Senkaku Islands. In response, the China refused to supply the rare earth to the Japan, and the Japanese manufacturing is very much dependent on to the rare earth elements, and therefore in Japan the production was stalled, the supply chain was impacted, and this is the man-made impact onto the supply chain. And specifically into this particular direction, China has often used the supply chain politics because, guys, if you know, today China has been so much penetrated into the world economies that one or the other raw material or the finished good is coming from China, and therefore whenever the China wants to get its way out, it uses the supply chain politics. Now, guys, because of such kind of thing, now an initiative has been taken up onto into the Asia, that is the supply chain resilience initiative, which has been spearheaded by the India, Japan and Australia, and they are saying that they will reduce their dependence on to the China in terms of making their supply chain self-sufficient. Guys, here the France had shown an interest and UK is also interested in joining this particular initiative. Now, guys, as the part of the SCRI, it has been decided that the reliance on to the China for the automobile parts, petroleum products, steel, textile, IT, that particular resilience will be reduced. Now, guys, when we are talking about the supply chain and the strategic viewpoint into the supply chain, there is one dimension which has been provided by the Henry Kissinger, the former Secretary of State of the USA. He said that there is a principle of linkage which exists. This principle says that the geopolitics and the geoeconomics go hand in hand. It simply means that without bringing the geopolitical disputes or elements into the context, you cannot simply talk only about the economic integration. Now, guys, this particular thing is true into the context of India and China also. China believes that it can continue the geo-economics with India, trade with India, without even talking about the LAC. But that thing will never be happening. If the economic ties between the India and China have to continue, then the geopolitics, politics which is happening onto the LAC has also to be accounted. Always China has used it, India should also use it and try to find out the solution for the LAC. Now, guys, further, as we are talking about the supply chain, the Australia as well as Japan along with the India, they all have been very much apprehensive for the China's domination. You can see into the India Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan is going on. Similarly, the Australia and Japan, they are also coming very vocally. Guys, Japan had clearly indicated that the relocation of the industry has to be taken up, and guys, even the Japan has initiated a $2.2 billion relocation project under which the companies, they are being provided a subsidy if they relocate from China. And into this particular direction, already the 89 Japanese companies operating into the China, they have decided to relocate. 57 of these companies are relocating back to Japan. Then there are 30 companies which are relocating to the Southeast Asia, and two are locating to the India. And guys, similarly, the Australia had also indicated its decoupling from the China. Australia had always faced a kind of a crisis, because guys, Australia has always been dependent on to the China for the grains, beefs, wine, the coal and all such kind of thing. And whenever the Australia tried to reassert it against the China, then China has used dependence of Australia onto these particular things for its geostrategic advantage. But now Australia, via joining the SCRI, is indicating that now it will not afford the bullying behavior of China. Now, the question comes about the India. See, if we talk about India, India is a aspirational power into the Asia, and it is emerging to be a global manufacturing hub. So India's supply chain resilience is very much important. But guys, actually if we see, India is overly dependent onto the supplies coming from China. For example, during the time of the lockdown, when the import was very much restricted, India impacted in manufacturing the automobile components, particularly 27% of automobile components into the India, they are imported from the China. Guys, even onto the pharmaceuticals, India is the world's largest manufacturer of the pharmaceutical drugs, but the active pharmaceutical ingredient API, which is the raw material for the drugs, for it the dependence is again onto the China, and more than 80% of the India's API is coming from the China. Similarly, guys, when we talk about the electronic industry, then there is a complete dependence onto the China. Guys, today India's electronic industry is worth $120 billion, and majority of this particular electronic is coming from the China. And by 2025, this industry will be reaching to nearly $250 billion. So India needs to explore that how resilience into the electronics India can made. Guys, government is actually is actively promoting the manufacturing of the printed circuit boards as well as the semiconductors, etc., so that India can achieve a kind of an Atmanirbharta. But still much more is to be done onto these particular fronts. And then guys, finally after them, the sector of defense comes. Now into the defense sector, India had decided to achieve the Atmanirbharta, and India had said that the Make in India will be given the much more importance. A list of 101 items have been prepared by the government, which will strictly not be imported, and in within the country they have to be made. Now guys, the question comes that whether presently India has the capacity or not. And even if there are certain shortcomings, guys, crisis is always the best opportunity to gain the strength, and India should not waste this crisis, and should enhance the capacities. And as far as early as possible, India needs to make the resilience into the supply chain, and this lesson needs to be taken from the pandemic. So guys, this is the key takeaway message which has been given into this particular article. I hope that you have understood it, and now we'll move to the next article. Now, guys, this particular article has been taken from the Hindu newspaper, and this article is very much specific to one state, that is the state of Karnataka. Guys, we don't need to go very much deep into this particular article. Just let's see what overview it is giving. So, this article says that in 2012, 39 areas into the Western Ghats, they were given the status of the World Heritage Site by the UNESCO. Now, this particular thing caused very much excitement into India, and guys, as the World Heritage Site status has been given, the preservation of these 39 areas became the utmost priority for the government. Now out of these 39 areas, 10 areas are into the Karnataka. Now guys, this particular move is good onto the terms of environment, but it has implication onto the indigenous people's survival. Guys, see, indigenous people, they are living into the ecologically fragile areas, they are living into the forest, and they are even dependent onto the forest for their survival. And into that direction, even India had instituted the Forest Right Act 2006, and even we have signed the Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous People in 2007, and this declaration is signed under the aegis of the United Nations. So these are the fronts on one direction, but guys, onto the other direction, big government is also is also talking about conserving the region, and into that conservation, the indigenous people, they are not being given their rights. rights. And specifically when the state of Karnataka is being talked about, guys, Karnataka had not recognized the right of the indigenous people who are living into the forest. Now in forest, if I tell you, there are actually two type of people are living. Number one, the indigenous people, and number one, two, the tribal people. Now the tribal people's right has been largely recognized by the government as the part of the FRA, but indigenous people's right are not being conserved, and this particular thing has been called as the tragedy of the conservation. Now guys, it has been provided that the rights of the indigenous people are not being recognized. However, at the same time, indiscriminate land is being given for the projects such as for the building of dam, mining, railway lines, road, power plant, etc. Moreover, the government record, they reveal that approximately 43 lakh hectare of forest land was encroached both legally and illegally until 1980. So basically for them, the government is not doing anything, and when the rights of the indigenous people come, the government shows the concern for the conservation. Guys, it has even been said that actually the local people, they are not encroaching onto the biodiversity, rather they preserve the biodiversity. And the Global Environment Outlook Report 5 mentioned that there is a decreased biodiversity across the globe even as the protected areas have been expanding. It says further that the people living in nature surrounding are integral to the conservation as they relate with it more into the integrated and the spiritual way. So if actually the conservation is to be done, then the people's rights need to be recognized and not to be thrown away into a trash. And therefore the recognition needs to be given, and the conservation via integrating the people needs to be carried away. So guys, that's all about this particular article, and now we'll be moving to the next article. Now guys, this particular article has been taken from the Hindu newspaper, and here we can see that the INCOIS had launched the Digital Ocean Initiative. Now first of all guys, the INCOIS, it stands for the Indian National Center for Oceanic Information Services. It is an autonomous body under the Ministry of Earth Sciences and has been responsible in order to provide the information with respect to the ocean trends and ocean services. Now guys, when we talk about this Digital Ocean Initiative, it is a kind of a dashboard or a data which has been created, under which the 3D models, the 4D models of the ocean information, the temperature, salinity, movement of water, the geospatial information with respect to the ocean, every information will be provided, and this information will be used for the sustainable use of the ocean. Guys, we have seen that already into the sustainable developmental goals, the specifically goal has been provided to conserve the life below the water, and therefore the sustainable use of ocean becomes indispensable. Now guys, via the correct information, the ocean exploration can be made into sustainable way. Then guys, India had taken up the target of being the blue economy, and for that particular thing, even the Neel Kranti mission has been initiated by the government. And the blue economy's target can only be reaped if the most comprehensive information with respect to the ocean is there. So therefore the INCOIS Digital Ocean project will be helping into all these particular directions. Moreover guys, when we are talking about the INCOIS, already it also provides a very important and crucial information. For example, it provides information with respect to the preferential potential fishing zone for the fishing communities, advisories, ocean state forecast, high wave alerts, tsunami early warnings, storm surge, oil spill advisories, and all such kind of thing. And guys, into this, the state of the art technologies are being utilized, and the real time informations onto the oceanographic and marine meteorological data is also being provided by the INCOIS. So guys, please use this particular thing into the context whenever you are writing about the India's strategy into the Indian Ocean, or India's strategy with respect to the blue economy. So for the data, you can utilize it. So guys, that's all about this particular article. Now guys, this particular article has been taken from the Hindu newspaper, and it is talking about the recent report that has been released by the RBI, that is the Trend and Progress of Banking in India report. Now guys, into this article, large number of data with respect to the banking forecast etc has been used, but guys, you don't need to keep such data into your mind. Number one, all these data are tentative, they are not final, and number two, these data are subject to change, and by the time you will be writing your next mains examination, such data would have been changed. Now guys, we just need to see the implication which has been indicated into the report. So it has been said that India's banking sector, both the bank as well as the non-banking financial companies, will be coming into the stress once the government will be returning to the normalization. See, there it has been said that as the lockdown was announced, the moratorium was given to the people who have taken the loan from the bank. This moratorium was extended successively to the August, and there were large number of people which have withheld the information, and by this particular thing the credit behavior into the people have been spoiled, the asset quality had went down, and there will be large number of accounts which will finally be turning into the NPAs, and therefore the gross NPA of the banking industry will be rising, and it will deteriorate the financial health of the economy. Guys, here we can see when the moratorium was announced, 26.6% of the total customers of the NBFC, they have appealed the moratorium, and the money that was due to them was 44.9% of the total loan outstanding, and this particular amount can come under the stress. So therefore some precautionary measures needed to be taken. So guys, into such kind of a thing, an indication has been provided. However, you don't need to go too much into this particular matter, because they are just the trends, and these actual information will be coming once finally all these things will be coming to the surface. So guys, that's all about the today's newspaper analysis. I hope that you are able to understand the news and you are liking our initiative. Guys, that's it. Thank you so much.